let us take just a moment and allow yourself to fully arrive to this moment. Your body is here, but let your full attention, intention, and awareness come to this very moment. If the mind wanders, just gently negative, where we're constantly telling ourselves negative things about ourselves. You are stupid, you are bad, you are worthless, you are ugly, you are this, you are that. Where we're constantly negative about ourselves, constantly criticizing ourselves. And so positive affirmations are very, very good to come in and to help fix that. Because a lot of those internal negative beliefs that we have come in from early childhood. We've kind of lived our whole lives with them, and we don't even necessarily realize they're there. But if you put a tape recorder in your own mind, and you actually listened to the way that you speak to yourself, you would never tolerate anyone else talking to you like that. Any friend, any loved one, even some random, paying guest roommate. You'd never tolerate it. Say, how dare you? Who do you think you are? Get out of my house. We would never tolerate someone 24/7 who constantly kept telling us, nobody likes you, you're useless, you're a failure, you're ugly, you're stupid, you'll never accomplish anything, you're not good enough, look how much better everybody is than you. We'd never tolerate it. I mean, could you imagine sitting on the toilet, being in the shower, lying down to go to bed at night, and your roommate is yelling through the door, or bursts into the bathroom, bursts into your bedroom just to stand over the toilet, or stand next to the shower, or stand over your bed, harassing you. You'd evict them in a second. And if they didn't leave, you'd call the police. This person's harassing me. But in our own minds, we allow it, not just for days or weeks, but for decades on end. And we take it to be true, as though somehow I thought it, therefore it's true. Some voice in my head says, you are stupid. And I take it, must be true, I thought it. Voice in my head says, you're lazy and irresponsible. Must be true, I thought it. And that's where that great quotation comes from that says, don't believe everything you think. Because most of us do. Just because we think it, suddenly we believe it. So positive affirmations, if you actually can deeply believe them, they can transform all of that negative programming. So if you have an affirmation, for example, that says, I am whole and complete and divine. And I can keep repeating that. And as I repeat it, I can deeply actually believe it. Then the more I repeat that affirmation, the less likely I am to believe when that programmed voice in my own head comes in and says, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're worthless, you're lazy, you're this, you're that. Because I now have not only a counter voice, but an entire counter belief system. So if you can believe them, absolutely they are powerful, they work, they rewire our entire brains. But even if you don't necessarily believe it, because a lot of times when we start a practice of affirmation, we may not believe it. We may have just, read it in a book or saw it in a video or heard somebody teaching that we should put up Post-it notes all over our house or put reminders on our phone that tell us that you are beautiful and wonderful and divine and powerful and whole and complete. And we may not believe it at all. And in those cases, it can feel really silly. You can sort of feel in yourself a bit contrived, but it still works. And it works simply because even if you haven't yet fully adopted the belief of it, the mind can actually only think one thing at a time. We think, my mind has got 100 things on it. But actually, it can only think one thought at a time. It goes very quickly through 100 different things. But at any given moment, it can only be thinking one thing. And so even if I don't necessarily believe the affirmation, simply the constant repetition of it prevents my mind from doing its normal negative nonsense. That's the most basic and superficial benefit of a mantra. The mantra has a much deeper power as well, of course, through the meaning, through the sound, through the language. But even on its most basic, superficial level, the mantra at least keeps us from having that pattern of the same negative thoughts over and over and over and over again that we get stuck in. So yes, positive affirmations absolutely work. Try to actually believe them, because then they work even better. But even if you don't believe it, do it anyway, because it will still change how the mind operates and how the mind thinks. Other questions? Yes. Yeah, you can just go to the mic and then you can, yeah.
Good evening. 2 nights ago, you touched on how survivors of violence and trauma can harness their growth and healing into something greater. Could someone somehow justify the trauma and abuse the perpetrators caused because of the said growth and healing of the survivor?
Great question. And no. That's like saying, I beat my child because his room is messy. And see, look, suddenly he keeps his room clean. See, it's worth it. I taught him to keep a clean room. Well, it's never worth it. There's no excuse for violence. The fact that out of the violence, you end up with a clean room because your kid doesn't want to get beaten again is not a justification for or an advertisement for beating your kids. To harm someone in a way that we were speaking the other night about someone who had been raped. So severe violence. But we were speaking about the the growth that also emerges from trauma and from severe challenges. That's a product of the strength of the survivor of that trauma. That is something that points to the greatness of, the courage of, the wisdom of the survivor of that trauma. It never, ever should be used or could conceivably be used as a justification by the perpetrator for why we do it. This is the weakest and cheapest things that people say. Spouses do it, parents do it, people who physically abuse each other and then say things like, it's for your own good. I beat you for your own good, to teach you a lesson. Well, the only lesson that we learn in that moment is to hate the person who harmed us. Nobody respects someone who hurts them. You may get behavioral obedience. So the child who gets beaten every time his room is a mess most likely will learn to keep his room clean. It's purely Darwinian survival. But that doesn't mean that you've actually taught him anything about taking care of one's things, that you've taught him anything about respect for your items, that you've taught him anything about neatness or responsibility. All you've taught him is, clean my room so mom doesn't freak out and beat me. That's all you've done. And what you've done is you've given him also a very deep wound that until and unless he gets some very intense and powerful work to heal with it, is going to actually cause him to live in fear of doing the wrong thing. Because in the same way that taking off his sweater and throwing it on the ground got him beaten, that makes the world a scary and unsafe place. It means if I do the wrong thing, I'm going to be abused and harmed. Which means that the world is not safe and I cannot trust and have faith. So parents who say that, and I know they do because I've heard it, it's a cheap shot. It's parents who can't control themselves and are looking for some kind of justification or rationalization for why they lose their temper, why they are unable to discipline in ways that are not harmful and violent. And so we blame the child, we blame the spouse. It's your fault. You made me hit you. If you were better, then I wouldn't have to beat you. A total load of you know what. Definitely not true, and definitely should never ever be used as a justification. The fact that someone learns a powerful lesson and is able courageously to go through the healing is a tribute to them, a tribute to their support system, a tribute to their karmic path. It does not absolve you of the harm that you did to them. Yeah, good question. Yes.
From one Stanford grad to another, go card, and good evening. I was fortunate enough to visit Jerusalem and Bethlehem earlier this year, and seeing the multitude of walls separating Israel and the West Bank and Palestine was sorrowful. Both are such spiritual and powerful places, and I feel it's quite a shame that so many people can't go to both. Personally, once we have sustained ceasefire and peace, I'm in favor of a three-state solution: Israel, Palestine, and a multi-faith land that encompasses Jerusalem and Bethlehem. What do you think is a feasible way to have sustained peace in the Middle East?
So I am most definitely not a political scientist. I am most definitely not an expert on the geopolitics of the land and the countries and the borders in the Middle East, or of the religious sites and lands of deep importance. I obviously know the stuff that we all know, but I would never pretend to be some kind of an expert who had a solution to a problem that has evaded actual experts for many, 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 many decades. The only solution that I feel very confident in is a solution from a spiritual perspective, which is the awareness that even though we worship in different ways, and we worship by different languages, and we worship using different books, that ultimately we are one. We're one on the deepest level of one soul, one spirit, one consciousness, one source. And we're also one on a very human level of being one people who depend upon the same air to survive, who depend upon the same water to survive, who depend upon the same soil to survive. We may have borders and boundaries, and yet the powerful weapons, like nuclear weapons, for example, a missile can have a short range of impact. A nuclear weapon does not. Doesn't care that there's a wall. Doesn't care that there's a border or a boundary. In the same way that environmental devastation doesn't care, in the same way that climate change doesn't care, in the same way that water shortages don't care. To me, the solution needs to be predicated upon an awareness of that oneness, and upon an awareness of the possibility of coexistence. That the pie of God's grace is not a finite pie. And just because I am sitting here in this holy place, praying to God in a certain language, by a certain book, with a certain name, and I am receiving grace, doesn't mean that there is less grace available for you. Also sitting in this holy land, praying to God by a different name, in a different language, with a different book. The dilemma is that in many cases, that which we think of as violence in the name of religion is much more violence in the name of geopolitics. It's much more violence in the name of land and resources and power. And religion becomes simply co-opted as an excuse to get people to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. So if I say to you, let's say I'm king of this garden, for example, and I really want to become king of that land as well, like beyond our gate of the garden. And I say to you, could you do me a favor? Could you go out and sacrifice your own life, or at the bare minimum, risk your own life, to go and to fight those people out there because I would like to be king of a bigger piece of land? It's very unlikely that you would say yes, because our lives are very precious to us. Why would you risk your life so I could be king of a bigger piece of land? So I could have more money, more power? You wouldn't kill yourself for it. You might, work for me, help me if you liked me or believed in me, but giving up your life is a totally different situation. But if I say to you, those people are anti-God. We are the only ones properly worshiping God. Those people are the ones who are committing not just sins against people, but sins against God. And if you go out there and you risk your life for God, God will give you everything. Everything, all of that, whether you say moksha, liberation, heaven, nirvana, whatever we call it, you will have it for eternity. Well, now I imagine that you're much more tempted to do what I say. And so we tend tragically to kind of co-opt God. To use God as a way to get people to do horrible things that risk their own lives. Where if we had simply told them it was because I want to be in more power with more money and more land, they wouldn't necessarily. And this is why, again, I think a spiritual solution is so critical. Because as long as we keep saying that God wants us to do that, or that God is against those people, or that they are against God, people who are lovers of God are going to keep being inspired and motivated and compelled to go out and to engage in violence in the name of God. So we need to deeply recognize that God would never send you to do such things. But in order to recognize that, you have to have a personal relationship with God, a personal experience of God, to the extent that I am dependent upon someone else telling me what God says, what God wants. Then I'm going to be corruptible and co-optible. I think that we need to recognize that all children are our children, and that Muslim mothers and Jewish mothers and Christian mothers mourn their children in the same way, and that Muslim children and Jewish children and Christian children mourn their parents in the same way. That there's no Muslim tears or Jewish tears or Christian tears. And when we really are able to anchor in not the pain that people of my religion or my state are feeling, but the exact same pain that people across this border are feeling, and really anchor in that humanity that transcends colors and languages and races and religions. I think that's the answer. Would a 3-state solution also be, a great geopolitical solution? Maybe. Again, as I began, I don't even begin to pretend to have the depth of political understanding to know what went wrong all of the times people brought up this idea in the past. Because as beautiful as it sounds, I promise you're not the first person to think of it. And so what has gone wrong with it in the past, what could go right with it in the future, not knowledge I have. But I know that any and all solutions, whether we speak of a one-state solution, a two-state solution, a three-state solution, some other solution, none of it is going to last unless we also have a deep spiritual solution. Otherwise, any solution you come up with can only be maintained and sustained by lots of people with guns standing on wherever you decide to draw the new borders and the new boundaries. What I promise you, my dad is a divorce attorney in Los Angeles, and I grew up listening to stories. He was never allowed to tell us the names of his clients for, confidentiality reasons, but he would tell just the general story of like, here's what the wife did, or here's what the husband did. And the incredibleness of the meanness, like purposeless meanness. I don't mean like stealing back something that you think was yours, but your divorced spouse took it. I mean purposeless meanness that they do to each other was incredible. And I mention this here because what my father always told me, and what I believe every single lawyer who has ever litigated or mediated a divorce would tell you is, at the end of the divorce settlement, whether it's an amicable mediation or whether they fight to the tooth and nail in court, at the end of the day, even if they both sign off on it, even if they agree, neither of them walks away feeling like, yes, I got a fair deal. Everybody walks away feeling like they didn't get what they deserved. Again, they may have agreed to it to at least stop giving so much money to the lawyers or to stop the fight. But no one walks out of a divorce saying, wow, that's so great. Finally, what I've always wanted, now I have it. They all feel that they've been cheated and deprived of something that was rightly yours, even though they agreed to it. But they all walk away feeling cheated and deprived. And so instinct is that whether it's a husband and a wife separating a house, property, possessions, whatever it may be, or whether it's different communities separating land, religious sites, I believe that that thing is going to be the same for these communities and these people in the same way that it's true for divorcing spouses. I do not see a situation where anyone walks away saying, perfect, now we got everything we wanted. It's going to have to be a compromise. It's going to have to be a sacrifice. And where there is compromise and sacrifice, there is dissatisfaction. And where there is dissatisfaction, violence can brew. And where violence can brew, you need to protect against violence. So tragically, my instinct is that even when, by God's grace, violence stops there and a time of peace emerges, I believe it will be a tenuous peace. And I believe it is a peace that will need to be maintained by continual armed forces. Unless we have a spiritual solution as well. And that's why I feel like, well, I don't have the expertise from the political standpoint, but if we all work spiritually in our lives to recognize, to embody, to live, to share love, peace, oneness, acceptance, embrace, that will go out into the universe. And the more of us who do that, the more I believe we will be able to really bring peace to this planet on the deepest level. Yes. Other questions? Yes.
Pranam, ma'am. This question is little awkward, but I want to discuss this. I want to discuss about sex. No one talks about it, and it's. I myself was I was shamed about my sexuality, and yeah, I want once I come in my spirituality, I realize how it's okay and everything that philosophical it is. What's your standpoint? What's your standpoint on it? And I want to know a solution for me that I should be very much okay that this is a part of me, because this is somewhere in my mind that this is not a good part of me.
Now, are you talking about, wait, stay there for just a moment. Stay there for just a moment. Are you talking about sex in general, or are you talking about homosexuality? That's okay. Your mic is off for some reason. Sex in general. General sex. Okay. When you said your sexuality, I wasn't sure whether you meant general sexuality or a specific sexuality. So we are here because of sex. We all better be really grateful to sex or we wouldn't be here. None of us came onto this earth without sex. So clearly sex, therefore, must be a good thing, because if all sex stopped, there would be no more people. So you cannot be anti-sex. I mean, to be anti-sex is to be anti-creation. To be anti-sex essentially says the human race should die out after me. So sex in general, not only is there nothing wrong with it, but it's very beautiful. It's a way that people, as long as people have existed, it's a way that they have come together to connect with each other and to make more people. So absolutely nothing wrong with it. Beautiful. There is nothing to be ashamed of. However, just because something is beautiful doesn't mean that it should be handled recklessly or indiscriminately. Chocolate is nice. That doesn't mean that you sit at home all day eating chocolate. Doesn't mean that you eat 10 pounds of chocolate in a sitting. It doesn't mean that you keep eating chocolate after you've become diabetic. Right? So I use that, silly example because we tend to think of things in black or white. Either it's good, which means do it all day long, do it everywhere, do it with everyone, do it all the time. Or we say it's bad, meaning you should never do it, you should never even think about it. And actually the answer lies somewhere in between. It was given to us biologically in order that we should propagate and be able to have more children. That is the ultimate evolutionary purpose of sex. That's why it feels good, so that people will keep doing it. If it hurt and felt awful, nobody would do it, no more children. So as we have evolved in this beautiful and divine creation, it has evolved in such a way that which keeps us alive is something that feels good, so that we will keep doing it so that there will be more and more children and people, and the human race will sustain itself. That's the physical evolution aspect of it. But on a spiritual level, there's a lot of points to be really aware of, and not just spiritually, but even just from a dharmic level, a level of ethics and values, is if you are not using sex to have children, because in that case, for most people, it would mean, well, only in your life you have sex once, or you have it twice, or at most, maybe 3 times. You have 1 child, or 2 children, or maybe 3 children. But that's obviously not the way that people have sex, nor is that the way that they need to. But what needs to happen is it needs to be brought into our values, our ethics, our spirituality. This is like, if you look at the yam and niyam of Ashtanga Yoga given to us by Patanjali. So in the yam of ahimsa, satyam, asteya, apigraha, meaning non-violence, truthfulness, non-stealing, non-hoarding. Well, the next one is brahmacharya. Some people translate that as celibacy. But I've heard it more frequently translated as integrity. Integrity in your relations. And what that means is conserve that energy. That energy is not meant to be wasted. It's not meant to be sent out into the universe unnecessarily. It is meant to create life. It is meant to take you closer to God in a very, very spiritual, very committed, very monogamous relationship. It's not meant to be something that you just do all of the time. And the reason we know that is that the energy of the body, what we call ojas, which is the literal energy of the body, the vibrancy of the body, actually is that which gets lost when you have sex. When you, in intercourse, have that moment of climax, you actually are losing that ojas. And that's why our sages and our saints and our rishis, even those who were not celibate monastics or sannyasis, one of the things that they all emphasized was conserving your ojas. That is what brings vibrancy to the body. It's what brings light and health to the body. I've heard spiritual masters and teachers and gurus over the many, many years I've been in India. I've heard them sometimes speak about somebody as saying, oh, that person is very weak. They're not healthy. They must be having too much sex. And they don't say it in a judgmental, like the person is bad sort of way. But they say it in a very caring and compassionate, like, oh, somebody really should teach this person to not have so much sex. Because look, they've got these dark circles under their eyes. Look, their health is clearly down. There's no light. There's no vibrancy. There's no ojas. Must be because they are losing that vital energy of the body. So it's really important to conserve it. I mean, think about it. It is energy that literally creates life. Think about how powerful that energy must be. I was speaking last night with the 2 cute little girls, any of you who were here, and we were talking about God and how God created life and how our best scientists, even knowing everything they know, cannot create life in a laboratory. That ojas is actually that which, with God's grace, creates life. So it's very, very powerful. So you want to be really careful to conserve it on a spiritual level, on a biological level, on a physiological level, but also on an emotional and a mental level. You want to be really sure that everything we do in life, what we eat, what we wear, how we shop, how we live, and how our sexual relations are, that all of them are in alignment with values and ethics and dharma. So if you are in a relationship of love and of commitment, and you're walking together closer and closer to your truth and to God, and you are able to use sex as a way, one of your many ways, of coming closer and closer and closer together, of losing your individual self, going from I to we, to that state of expansion, then yes, it can be a very powerful practice. Occasionally. But you should make sure that you've got a lot of other powerful practices also, so that you can conserve that energy as much as possible. And by the way, interestingly, but also sadly for so many people, simply thinking a lot about sex, even if you're not actually doing it, also depletes our ojas a lot. So it's not just a matter of, grit your teeth and restrain yourself, but it's actually a matter of purifying the mind and transforming the mind to see. When you look at another being, instead of seeing them as a potential sex object or a potential sexual partner, that you see them as the divine. And when that purification arises, then you're able to connect to people soul to soul. And the mind then doesn't go into all of those lust-filled thoughts when you're talking to somebody or meeting somebody or walking down the street. So unless you are destined to be a sannyasi, a monk, in the same way that you take care of how you eat, of how you drink, of how you live, of all of the different ways that you live, you need to also be really careful to take care of that energy and that act so that it's in alignment with your life of dharma. Beautiful. Thanks for asking the awkward question, as you said. Good. Have a beautiful rest of your evening, everyone.